He didn't even look me in the eyes when he said it. Just stood there at the foot of the stairs, one hand still on his fancy leather suitcase, and muttered the word like it meant nothing. Burden. I'd spent nearly 3 decades in that house, raising him alone after his mother passed. It had been our cradle, our shelter, the place where scraped knees were patched and dreams were spoken under soft yellow light in the kitchen. And yet here he was, 38 years old, his voice cool with judgment, saying the quiet part out loud. "Dad, maybe it's time we talk about assisted living," Nathan had said, using the same tone he'd once used to ask for the car keys as a teenager. "This house is too much for you now. It'd be better if you weren't here alone anymore." I stood by the sink, hands dripping from rinsing a chipped coffee mug. I turned off the tap slowly, like it could buy me time. "Assisted living," I repeated. He glanced at his Rolex. "You've had 2 falls this year, and you forget things." The doctor said I was fine. He didn't argue that. He just sighed and walked into the living room, where his wife Megan was already scrolling on her phone, not even pretending to look up. She'd never liked this house. Too old, too cluttered, too full of memories that didn't belong to her. I dried my hands and followed. My knees ached, but I didn't show it. Old pride runs deeper than bone. "That house will be yours one day," I told Nathan once, long ago, when he was still young enough to believe I could do no wrong. "You'll raise your own children in it. Maybe add a swing in the front." He'd nodded then, smiled. But people change. Life hardens them. Now, he saw me as the obstacle between him and a property he thought he was entitled to. Not because of love, but because of equity, market value, investment potential. He thought I didn't see it, but I did. I saw it in the way he looked around the living room like a realtor, not a son. I saw it in the way he flinched when I asked if he wanted to go through the old photo boxes. I saw it every time he calculated instead of remembered. That night, after they left, I sat in my recliner and looked around. The lamp by the window still flickered when the wind was high. The wallpaper peeled slightly by the staircase where Nathan had once driven his toy trucks up and down. The hallway still smelled faintly of cinnamon and cedar. I lit a cigarette. I hadn't smoked in years, but that night I did. Then I made a decision. Not out of anger. Out of peace. Out of tiredness. Out of the need to reclaim something they had slowly tried to take from me, my dignity. 3 weeks later, the papers were signed. I sold the house. Cash buyer. No open house. No signs. No drama. The new owner was a kind woman named Denise. Widow. Teacher. Mid-50s. Said she'd always dreamed of living in a place with history. I liked her instantly. Before she moved in, I took one last walk through each room. I touched the doorframe where Nathan's growth had been measured in pencil lines and years. I sat for 5 minutes in the garden where my wife and I had planted azaleas. I stood in the bathroom mirror and looked at myself freely looked. Gray hair, tired eyes, liver spots. But there was something else, too. Freedom. Nathan called me 3 days after the sale went through. "You what?" "I sold it." Silence. "Dad," he finally said, his voice tight. "That house was supposed to stay in the family." "No," I said quietly. "It was supposed to be a home. But you stopped treating it like one." He started to argue. Something about legacy, something about me being irrational. But I was already done listening. I'd moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment in a quiet part of town. It had a view of the river and was just 5 blocks from the library. No stairs. No ghosts. For the first time in years, I felt light. I didn't tell Nathan where I moved. He didn't ask. Weeks passed. I thought I might regret it. But I didn't. Instead, I began to remember who I was before I became someone's burden. I joined a book club at the library. Met a few others around my age who hadn't yet been shelved away. One woman, Marlene, had a laugh like wind chimes and eyes that remembered how to be kind. She asked me to walk with her on Wednesdays. I said yes. I stopped waiting for calls that didn't come. I stopped looking at the door like someone was supposed to walk through it. And one day, as I sat on a bench watching the sun melt into the river, I smiled. Not because I was happy, not fully, but because I had chosen something, at last, for me. And that small rebellion felt like victory. But peace, like age, is rarely uninterrupted. It came a few months later. A knock on the door. Nathan. He looked thinner, dark circles under his eyes. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, just a t-shirt and jeans that didn't fit right. "Dad," he said. His voice cracked a little. I didn't open the screen door. "I came to talk," he said. I nodded toward the bench on the sidewalk. We can talk there. He hesitated, then sat. So did I. The river moved slowly behind us, its current unbothered by whatever history sat between us. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, I'm sorry. I didn't answer. I didn't mean it. What I said back then. You did, I said. And that's okay. He looked away. I miss Mom. My throat tightened. She would have been proud of you, I said. I don't know about that, he whispered. I lost my job. Megan left. Took the kids to her sister's. I said nothing. I came by the old house, he said. It's different now, but still feels like you. I looked at him then. Really looked. This wasn't the boy I'd raised. But maybe it was a man learning how to fall and stand again. Would you walk with me tomorrow? I asked. His eyes met mine. Yeah, I'd like that. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin something new. Even after everything. Even after being called a burden. We didn't speak much that first walk. The next morning, Nathan showed up right at 9, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. His hands were shaking slightly, and I wasn't sure if it was nerves or just too little sleep. Maybe both. I took one of the cups. No sugar, just the way I liked it. How'd you know? I asked. You always drank it black, he said, eyes on the river. I remembered. We walked slowly down the trail that hugged the bank. Summer was beginning to loosen its grip, and the leaves had just started to whisper the first hints of gold and rust. We passed dog walkers, joggers, and an old couple arguing softly about which bird was a finch. I used to think getting old meant becoming irrelevant, Nathan said, like a light switch slowly dimming. I glanced at him. But watching you these past few months hearing about the book club, that woman you walk with, Marlene? I gave a soft smile. I realized I had it backwards, he continued. You're more alive now than I've been in years. I had to choose to be, I said. It didn't happen on its own. He nodded. I haven't chosen much lately. Mostly just reacted. We reached the bridge and stood in silence for a moment. I was angry when you sold the house, he said. Not because of the money or the inheritance. That was just noise. I think. I was angry because I realized I didn't really know you anymore. I think that's because you stopped trying. I did, he admitted. After Mom died, I buried myself in work. Then the kids came, and Megan and I weren't doing well, and You forgot that I was grieving too. He looked like I'd struck him, but it wasn't cruel. Just the truth. I lost my wife, I said quietly, and my son disappeared right after. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. I didn't know how to be around you. Everything felt so heavy. I nodded. It was. But that didn't mean you had to leave. We watched a heron land gracefully in the shallows. I want to make things right, he said after a long silence. If you'll let me. Making things right doesn't mean going back, I said. It means building forward. I can do that, he said, with a kind of soft desperation. I believed him. Not because he said it, but because for the first time in a very long while, he wasn't trying to control the outcome. He was just showing up. We started walking together once a week. No grand declarations. No forced conversations. Just quiet companionship built over small shared moments. Like the way he'd point out a funny-shaped cloud, or how he'd offer me his jacket when the wind turned cold. Sometimes we'd stop at the bakery on 6th Street. He'd always get the same thing, apple fritter and coffee. I started bringing Marlene along too, and to my surprise, she and Nathan got along just fine. One day in October, as we sat under a tree, Nathan turned to me and said, I found a new job. It's not finance, just managing inventory at a bookstore. But I like it. I clapped him on the shoulder. That's good. He looked proud, in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Funny thing, he added. They needed someone to run a small community reading program for seniors. I told them I knew just the guy. I raised an eyebrow. He smirked. I meant you. I laughed. Actually laughed. You think old people want to hear me ramble? I think they'd like hearing about the man who sold his house to find his freedom. I looked out over the river. I'll think about it. That winter, we hosted Thanksgiving in the community center near my apartment. Nathan brought his kids Lily and Jonah, and even Megan showed up, though she spent most of the meal politely distant. It didn't matter. The kids lit up the place. Jonah ran laps around the tables while Lily clung to my side, asking me endless questions about when her dad was little. Did Daddy cry when he got shots? He did. Like a banshee. Lily burst into giggles. So did Nathan, from across the room. After dinner, as everyone was packing up, Lily hugged me tight and whispered, Grandpa, I like your house better than Daddy's old one. I kissed the top of her head. Me too, sweetheart. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the last slice of pie was gone, Nathan helped me take out the trash. The cold air had a bite to it, and our breath came in soft clouds. I want to ask you something, he said, pausing at the dumpster. Go ahead. If things were different, if I'd been better, sooner would you have still sold the house? I looked at him hard. Maybe, I said honestly, but not for the same reasons. He nodded slowly. Fair. And maybe, I added, it had to happen. For both of us. He turned to me. I've missed so much. There's still time. He smiled, and this time, it reached his eyes. We didn't speak the rest of the way back, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full, like the spaces between piano notes that make the music whole. In the months that followed, I started writing again. Nothing serious. Just stories. Memories. Lessons I hadn't known I'd learned. Sometimes Nathan would read them. Sometimes he'd bring his own. We were learning each other again, not as father and son bound by blood, but as men who had both been broken and chose to rebuild. One evening in early spring, Marlene and I were sitting on a bench when she turned to me and said, "You're softer now." I raised an eyebrow. She smiled. Not weaker. Just more open. I thought about that. Maybe I was. Maybe losing the house hadn't been a loss at all but a release. A shedding of everything that had kept me trapped in the idea that who I was had already been written. Because even in old age, you could begin again. And sometimes, starting over doesn't mean moving on. It means coming home to yourself. That spring, something unexpected began to happen. Nathan started bringing his kids by more often Saturday mornings mostly. Lily would bring her sketchbook and curl up in the corner of my small living room, drawing pictures of birds and flowers and houses that always had smoke curling out of the chimney. Jonah was more chaotic, as 7-year-olds tend to be bouncing between cabinets, asking endless questions about why old people's TV remotes have so many buttons. At first, I worried they'd be bored, that my small, quiet world wouldn't compare to the fast-paced, screen-filled one they were used to. But they kept coming, week after week. Nathan even bought a chess set and tried to teach Jonah, though the boy mostly just moved the pieces around and gave each one silly names. The queen was Laser Grandma. The bishop became Sir Slidey. It made no sense, but it made him laugh, and that was enough. One afternoon, Nathan asked if he could store a few boxes at my place. He looked sheepish, like he was afraid I'd say no. Just for a while, he said, until I get things more stable. I waved him in, put them in the hall closet. Inside the boxes were fragments of a life, unraveling folded clothes, some paperwork, a broken picture frame, a few of Jonah's toys. I didn't ask questions. I knew what it meant. Megan had made her choice. Final this time. Nathan didn't talk about it much, but in the quiet moments, I saw the weight of it on his shoulders. The same kind of weight I carried after his mother died. It changes a man, softens and sharpens him at the same time. One evening, as the kids played with a puzzle on the rug, Nathan sat beside me at the kitchen table. I always thought being strong meant keeping it all together, he said. But I think strength might be knowing when to fall apart in front of the right people. I nodded. Took me a long time to learn that too. He sipped his tea, staring into the steam. Thanks for not shutting me out. After everything. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the boy who left or the man who failed. I saw someone trying. And that was enough. You came back? I said. That's more than most. He swallowed hard and nodded. Then we both turned our eyes back to the children, who were now arguing about whether dragons would like peanut butter. By midsummer, the river trail was crowded again, teenagers on bikes, elderly couples with walking sticks, the occasional jogger blasting music through too loud earbuds. Marlene and I still walked every Wednesday. Sometimes Nathan joined us, sometimes not. She had become a constant, like sunlight through a lace curtain, gentle, never too much. She'd bring cut fruit or stories from her teaching years or questions about what it felt like to love the same person for 30 years and then lose them in a single day. I answered when I could. Other times, we just walked in silence, hands occasionally brushing but never holding. One day, as we sat on our usual bench, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever feel like your second life is better than your first?" I thought about that. No, I said. Just different. But I'm more awake in this one. She smiled. Me too. We didn't need to say more than that. Later that summer, Nathan invited me to the bookstore where he worked. They were hosting a small poetry reading, and he wanted me to come. I almost said no. Crowds aren't really my thing anymore. But I saw the way his eyes lit up when he talked about it, so I agreed. The place was cozy with shelves, warm lights, the smell of paper and coffee. I recognized some of the staff from his stories. Young kids mostly, but friendly. Nathan introduced me to his manager, then disappeared for a moment behind the counter. When he returned, he had a small envelope in his hand. No name on it. "For you," he said, looking nervous. I opened it. Inside was a single page. A poem. Typed. Inheritance. He thought I gave him wood and nails. A house with rooms he'd one day claim. But I gave him my hands, my heart, my years. And left him only his own name. I thought he'd build where I once stood. That roots would deepen where I fell. But he cut the branches, left the tree. And called the silence home as well. I sold the house, but kept the ghost. Of everything I gave away. And found, in losing what he loved, the will to love myself one day. I stared at it for a long time. "Did you write this?" I asked. He nodded. "I didn't know you wrote poetry." He shrugged, sheepish. "I didn't. Not until recently. It wasn't perfect. The lines were raw, uneven. But it was real. And it hit me harder than I expected." I folded it carefully and slipped it into my coat pocket. "Thank you," I said. He smiled. "For what?" "For coming back to me." That night, I walked home under the glow of street lamps, the poem still warming my chest like an ember. Back in my apartment, I took out one of the old boxes I hadn't touched in years. Inside were photos, receipts, old birthday cards from Nathan, some yellowed at the edges. And at the very bottom an unopened envelope addressed to me in his mother's handwriting. I'd found it years ago, in the weeks after her funeral, but I never had the heart to open it. Until now. I slid my finger along the edge and unfolded the paper slowly. It was short, just a few lines. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But if he's still there, Arbor, remind him who you are. Not just his father, but a man. A whole one. He'll need that. One day, he'll need to see who you are when you're not holding the world for him. Let him carry a little of it, too. He can. He just needs to know how." Tears slid down my cheeks. Quiet, but steady. I folded the letter and placed it next to Nathan's poem on the table. Then I turned out the light and sat in the dark, surrounded by the gentle hum of the city, my heart full not of regret, but of something else. Something closer to peace. The next few weeks felt like a slow, steady bloom. Nathan started helping out at the senior center. Not just the reading program, volunteered for everything. Bingo nights, art workshops, even the tech help sessions where he'd explain, for the 100th time, how to reset a password without yelling. One afternoon, I walked in to find him laughing with Mr. Henderson, a 90-year-old war vet who hadn't cracked a smile in months. Nathan caught my eye across the room, and I nodded slightly. "You're doing good, son." He smiled. That night, after most folks had cleared out, he and I stayed behind stacking chairs and wiping down tables. "You seem lighter," I told him. He paused, leaning on the back of a chair. "I think, for the first time in years, I'm not chasing anything." "You were always running," I said, "even when you stood still." He chuckled. "Yeah, I used to think success meant skyscrapers and corner offices. But lately, I've been measuring my days in different ways." "Like what?" He looked thoughtful. "Like how many real conversations I had. How often I laughed. If my kids saw me be kind." I stepped back and looked at him, the broad shoulders, the tired but open face, the creases near his eyes earned not from stress, but from smiling. "You're becoming a man I'd want to know," I said. He swallowed. "That means more than I can say." Before we left, he reached into his pocket and handed me a key. "What's this?" "Spare key to my apartment. In case you ever need it. Or, if the kids want to surprise you." I took it without saying anything, but my throat tightened as I slipped it into my coat. It wasn't just a key. It was a gesture of trust, of family, of repair. And it mattered. That summer, we planned a weekend getaway. Just me, Nathan, Lily, and Jonah. A cabin up in the hills, nothing fancy, just wood walls, a small dock, and a lake that glittered like glass in the morning. Nathan said he wanted to give the kids something different. A memory that wasn't wrapped in screens or city noise. And so, we packed sandwiches and sunscreen and board games, and for 2 days, we unplugged. I watched Lily catch her first fish tiny, no bigger than a Sardinian scream, with equal parts terror and joy. I watched Jonah jump off the dock and lose a tooth in the water, which led to a 15-minute search party that ended with him proudly announcing, "The fish are richer now." At night, we lit a fire and roasted marshmallows. The kids fell asleep in a tangle of blankets and giggles, and Nathan and I sat under the stars. "Do you remember when I was 8?" he asked. "And you took me camping after Mom died?" I nodded. "You cried all night. Said the tent felt too quiet." He smiled. "But then you told me the wind was her voice, and I listened for it until I fell asleep." "She's still in the wind," I said. "And in you." He looked down at his hands. "I miss her every day." "Me too." Silence again. But it wasn't hollow. It held everything we hadn't said before. "Do you ever think about going back?" he asked. "To the old house. To that life. Before everything changed." I thought about it. Sometimes, I admitted. But not with longing. Just with gratitude. It was beautiful while it lasted. He nodded. "I think I tried to outrun the past instead of honoring it." "We all do," I said. "Until it catches up. Then we realize it wasn't chasing you, it was waiting for us to turn around." He chuckled. "You should write that down." "Maybe I will." The fire crackled low, and we sat there for hours, two men who had once been broken by silence, now learning how to sit inside it with grace. The following fall, the bookstore where Nathan worked announced it was closing. Big chain retailers. Online competition. The usual story. He took it hard, but not in the way I expected. "This time," he said, "I want to build something. Not just find another job." He started sketching out ideas for a nonprofit one that brought books and stories into retirement homes, senior centers, even hospital wings. "Stories keep us alive," he told me. "And too many people stop hearing them when they're older." I offered to help. I wrote a few sample stories, typed up lesson ideas, even recorded my voice reading old favorites for folks who couldn't see well anymore. We named the project Second Chapter. Within 2 months, a small foundation offered a grant. Within 4, Nathan had hired a part-time staff and launched a pilot program in 3 senior homes. By Christmas, he was giving talks at community centers and recording podcast episodes with elderly guests telling their favorite memories. I listened to every single one. Sometimes I heard a crack in their voice that reminded me of my own father. Other times I heard laughter so rich I had to pause and just let it wash over me. People were listening. And Nathan was finally heard, not for being loud, but for giving others a voice. That winter, we celebrated my 75th birthday at Marlene's house. It was a potluck, with more casseroles than one table could reasonably hold. Nathan made chili. Lily brought a card with a hand-drawn version of me riding a rocket labeled "Old but Cool." Jonah gave me a flashlight and whispered, "For when your memory forgets the lights." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my plate. After cake, Nathan raised his glass and cleared his throat. "I want to say something," he said. The room quieted. He turned to me. "I spent years thinking my father was just a part of my past. But these last 2 years, I've realized the best part of my present. And I hope, if I'm lucky, part of my future too." I felt my eyes sting. Tried to speak. Couldn't. So I stood up and hugged him instead. The room applauded, but all I could hear was his heartbeat, steady against mine. That night, back in my apartment, I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote, "I was called a burden, but maybe I had to be heavy for a Willie so he could learn how to carry what matters." I closed the notebook, turned out the light, and slept without regret. Spring came early the next year. The air warmed before it should have, and the trees bloomed fast. As if making up for time they felt they had lost. Everything felt lighter. So did I. Nathan's project, Second Chapter, had expanded. Now it reached across counties, partnering with local schools and high school volunteers to connect generations through storytelling. He asked me to speak at one of the events, a gathering at a small library where teenagers sat in folding chairs across from nursing home residents, each group armed with pens, voice recorders, and wide eyes. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the podium, paper shaking slightly in my hands. "I wasn't always a storyteller," I began. "I was a father, a husband, a man who spent most of his life thinking the story had to be perfect to matter." I paused, looked out at the room, at Nathan standing near the back with Jonah perched on his shoulders. "But I learned something in the silence that came after loss," I continued. "That it's not about telling a story that's polished. It's about telling one that's true. I read an old piece I'd written about my wife, about how she hummed while watering the garden, how she made the world feel soft, even when it wasn't, and how, even after she left, her presence echoed in the smallest things: a coffee cup, a song, the sound of our son's laughter. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then a girl, maybe 16, raised her hand and asked, "Do you ever wish you could go back and change things?" I smiled gently. "No," I said, "because every mistake, every silence, every painful word brought me here. And here's a good place to be." A few months later, I started experiencing some light chest pain. At first, I brushed it off as heartburn. Too much chili, I told myself. But one afternoon while walking with Marlene, I stopped mid-step. The sky spun. My breath caught. I woke up in a hospital room. Nathan was sitting beside me, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. He looked up when I stirred. "Hey," he whispered, as if any louder would break me. "You look like hell," I croaked. He laughed through tears. "Takes one to know one." The doctor came in shortly after and explained I'd had a minor heart attack. Nothing too severe, but a clear sign to slow down. Rest more. Let others carry what I'd held for so long. That night, Nathan stayed in the room. Didn't leave. Around 2 a.m., he pulled his chair closer and spoke in a voice just above a whisper. "I don't want to lose you before I've had the chance to show you how much I've learned." "You've already shown me," I murmured. "Every day. But I want more time." "Then don't waste any," I said. "With anyone." He nodded, eyes glassy. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Always." "I used to think the worst thing that ever happened was losing Mom," he said. "But I think the worst was forgetting what you both taught me after." I reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. "We remember now," I said. After I was discharged, Nathan insisted I move in with him. At first, I refused. "I'm not an invalid," I said. "Just old." But then Lily drew a picture of their living room with me in it, holding a cat she'd named Captain Grandpa, and I found myself packing a suitcase without further protest. The apartment was small, but full of warmth. They cleared a room for me, put my books on the shelf, and Jonah offered to let me borrow his favorite flashlight in case the dark got scary. Some nights I sat on the balcony with Nathan after the kids had gone to bed. We talked about his plans, his fears, his failures, and how they shaped him. "I want them to grow up knowing they can fall apart and still be loved," he told me once. "They already do," I said. One night, Lily tiptoed into my room with a blanket. "Just in case you're cold," she said, even though it was summer. I draped it over my knees and pulled her into a hug. "You're my favorite old person," she whispered. I grinned. "I'll try to stay old just for you." That fall, second chapter received national recognition. A segment on public radio, a feature in a magazine, even an invitation to speak at a conference in Chicago. Nathan hesitated. "I don't know if I'm the right person to speak to a crowd that big," he said. "You are," I told him, "because you're not trying to impress anyone. You're just trying to help." He asked me to come with him. We flew out together. I hadn't been on a plane in years. Everything felt smaller, louder. But I held his hand during takeoff and reminded him how he used to pretend clouds were floating castles. He laughed, like he was 8 again. At the conference, Nathan stood on stage before hundreds of people, told our story not just of a nonprofit, but of a father and son who'd found their way back. He didn't mention the word burden. He didn't have to, because it no longer defined anything between us. He finished his talk with something I'd written in my journal months ago. Sometimes the house has to fall to rebuild the family inside it. When the applause came, it was thunderous. But what mattered most was the way he looked at me afterward, eyes steady, heart full, a man no longer trying to be perfect. Just present. Just real. Years passed. Slowly, beautifully. I watched Lily become a young woman with a passion for storytelling and a fierce heart that reminded me of her grandmother. Jonah grew into a tall, kind boy who still called me Captain Grandpa and brought me his favorite snacks when he thought I looked a little too quiet. Nathan remarried eventually. Not Megan. Someone softer. Wiser. A woman who loved that he still read bedtime stories and cried at happy endings. Marlene and I stayed close. Never married. Never lived together. But we had what mattered. A shared life. Slow and sincere. Sometimes that's more than enough. In my final years, I kept writing. Essays. Letters. A memoir Nathan helped publish through second chapter. It wasn't a bestseller. but it found its way into the hands of the people who needed it. The title? The Weight of Love. In the last chapter, I wrote, "He called me a burden once. And maybe I was. But not because I was heavy. Because he didn't yet know how strong he could be. And when he finally stood tall beneath the weight of memory, regret, and love became the man I always knew he could. When I passed, it was quiet. In my sleep. The way I'd always hoped. They buried me beneath a tree not far from the river trail where it all began again. Nathan placed a bench near the grave. On the plaque, it read, "He taught me how to carry the world, and how to lay it down." People still visit. Sometimes they bring books, or stories, or just sit in silence. And when the wind moves through the branches above, it sounds almost like a voice. Humming. Soft. Steady. And very much alive.